Welcome to our session, Advanced Purchasing of Near Zero Concrete for DOTs. My name is Anish Tulak. I'm a manager in the Carbon Free Buildings program at RMI, and we're happy to host this session in partnership with the First Movers Coalition and NRDC to delve into some of the ways that the public sector can begin to think about advanced purchasing of emerging low and near zero carbon concrete materials. So we have an exciting panel of speakers lined up for today. We have folks from the First Movers Coalition, which is part of the World Economic Forum. So we have Aneta Likaj and Daniel Vargas, who will give us an introduction to some of the private sector advanced purchasing initiatives out there. And then myself and Dharma Santos Santiago from the Natural Resources Defense Council will provide some context for how the public sector can start to take action towards advanced purchasing of these materials. And a couple of housekeeping items. If you have questions during the session, feel free to use the Q&A feature in Zoom, and at the end of both presentations, we will have some time for facilitated Q&A. So here's an overview of our agenda for today. We'll start with some introduction to advanced purchasing by the RMI team, just to lay the fundamentals out of what we're really here to talk about today. And then we'll hand it over to the speakers from the First Movers Coalition to talk about some insights from those private sector demand initiatives. And then we'll come back to the roadmap to public sector advanced purchasing for low carbon concrete by NRDC and RMI. And as mentioned previously, after the presentations, we'll take the Q&A from the Q&A function in Zoom. And then we also have an interactive activity for attendees. It'll be a live audience polling activity to both understand what folks' interests are in this topic and then identify some next steps to move this forward. And we'll also leave a little bit of time for open discussion. So as you can see, you're in a webinar format. So you currently don't have the ability to speak up outside of the chat and Q&A, but we will enable you all to raise your hands and speak up and provide some insights from your experience and expertise. So we look forward to that and really hope you can stick around for that, because we want to hear from you. And then we'll close after that. So before we go into the presentations, a few objectives for the session. So we hope folks will leave with some fundamentals about what advanced purchasing is. They're also called advanced market commitments, or AMCs. So you'll see this acronym AMCs used throughout, and really this is just a term for advanced purchasing. And we'll get more into some definitions around that shortly. We also want you to learn about what the private sector is doing on this. There's been a lot of activity in AMCs in the private sector, led by organizations like the First Movers Coalition that go across material categories and sectors. So today we're focused on low carbon concrete and cement as part of this session. But we want you to know that AMCs are broader than just this one sector, and they apply to many other different sectors that are trying to decarbonize and improve their environmental impact. And then finally, we see a really important opportunity for the public sector to start to think about AMCs and advanced purchasing. And so while that goal of an AMC for public sector might be further out, we do have some near-term actions that public agencies can take to start to move towards low carbon concrete AMCs today. So we'll start with some background just on what RMI has been doing to date on as part of this webinar series. So this is actually the fifth in a series of sessions that we've had focused on low carbon concrete infrastructure. And so you can see the 4 different topics that we've covered to date, and we can share the recordings and presentations for these after the session if you were not able to join those. But we covered a range of topics from BiClean and EPDs to specific technologies like limestone calcined clay. We talked about specifications. And then just recently, we went into more of a technical session on near zero and zero emissions concrete. So if you're looking for information on what the latest and greatest exciting technologies are, Workshop 4 will have that information. Today, we're really thinking about how we can get access and scale those technologies that fall under this near zero and zero emissions category. As part of this work, we've engaged state departments of transportation and public agencies across the country. So you can see some highlighted states here. And so this is really a national effort, and we're really excited to see the participation from states across geographies. And here's just a quick summary of our previous speakers. I won't go through everyone individually, but did want to appreciate and thank the folks from all these different organizations who contributed to our workshop series on low carbon concrete for DOTs. So with that, we'll get into some of the content for today, which starts with the fundamentals of advanced market commitments, or AMCs. So what is the problem that we are trying to solve? Today, industrial sectors are seeking to decarbonize, invest in facilities that will reduce their impact on climate change and other environmental impact categories as well. At the same time, folks who use products from those sectors, such as concrete, are trying to reduce their emissions impact, their Scope 3 emissions impact as well. So broadly speaking, there is some barriers to builders, developers, infrastructure builders included, and end users of concrete in reducing those Scope 3 emissions beyond some readily accessible near-term solutions that are out there. So a few of those barriers are listed on the slide here. For a supplier, it's really expensive for them to retrofit their facilities to produce near zero concrete or cement. The concrete industry has a really long value chain. So the cement supplier is often or always disconnected from the end user of that product, who might be as small as a home builder or a single person building their home. So local, and then also there's localization of production and distribution. Concrete is a very geographically distributed industry, which makes these things a challenge. There's uncertainty about the future projections of how much concrete you will be building as a business. Development in the real estate industry fluctuates. There's cycles to development, which makes projection challenging. In addition, it's a complex issue from an environmental perspective in terms of the accounting. And because there's such a fragmented and geographically distributed value chain, there's a lack of visibility into that supply chain. So these are some of the barriers that we're trying to solve with advanced purchasing by sort of connecting and simplifying the value chain and providing dollars upstream to support those facilities decarbonize. So broadly speaking, an advanced market commitment starts with an agency or a buyer identifying innovative near zero emissions technologies or construction materials. Then that entity would commit to advanced purchasing based on the product's performance. So really what we're talking about is pre-ordering. And then that pre-ordering enables the suppliers to receive bankable demand, which then allows them to invest in production. So it allows them to get loans, et cetera, to actually supply those products. And then ultimately, once those products are produced, more consumers will have access to them, buy them, and use them in their projects. So this is sort of the theory of change for how an advanced market commitment can ultimately transform the concrete industry. So AMCs are binding legal contracts between purchasers and producers of yet to be developed technologies. So as I mentioned previously, it's pre-ordering of materials. And what it really is intended to do is provide investment to early stage technologies that are struggling to scale commercially and compete with the market. And they need clear demand signals in order for financial firms to invest in them. So this is really what we're trying to solve. A few benefits to note. One is that, as mentioned, it creates demand for new innovative technologies that was not there before. It can provide fixed commodity pricing for advanced purchasers. So the speakers from FMC will speak about a few kind of pricing mechanisms for AMCs, but one possible opportunity is that the buyer would actually have a fixed commodity price for, say, cement, which fluctuates currently on the market. And finally, it enables the suppliers of those technologies to secure financing for scaling. And so the three pieces to walk away from this with in terms of the basics of AMCs: an agreement between purchaser and producer, a commitment to purchase a certain volume of product, and of course the purchaser would specify, what the performance attributes of that product they're looking for are. Agreement, commitment to purchasing, and then unlocking financing for the producers to supply those products and meet the terms of the agreement. And AMCs are not something completely new. There's some really great examples from both the public and private sector, actually, for AMCs. One recent example from the public sector is the development of the COVID vaccines, which leveraged AMCs to ensure rapid and equitable deployment of those vaccines globally. So I think that's like a very near-term example that many folks can reference and understand. When we talk about decarbonization and industrial applications in the private sector, there's a groundbreaking AMC for carbon removal that's organized by Frontier, which gathered $1 billion in purchasing for carbon removal projects from a number of corporates. So those are two examples of AMCs, and it's all about bringing governments or entities together, making these kind of pre-orders to unlock investment. So those are the basics about AMCs, and with that, I will pass it to Daniel to take us into the First Movers Coalition presentation. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Anish, and lovely to be here with you all today. My name's Daniel Boero. I'm the sector lead for the cement and concrete sector within the First Movers Coalition, which is an initiative run within the World Economic Forum. If we can move to the next slide, please, Anish. And one more. So the First Movers Coalition is, as mentioned, an initiative run within the World Economic Forum. It sits within our Centre for Nature and Climate, and it is the world's largest private sector demand-focused industry decarbonisation initiative. At its core, it seeks to send a credible demand signal to suppliers around the world that if deeply decarbonised products and services are produced across the sectors that we work in, they will ultimately be bought, which in turn justifies investment from these suppliers to scale and grow these technologies. In terms of here, what we've got on the slide of vision and mission, there are three numbers I want to call out, which are 25, 50, and 2030. 25, because the sectors that FMC works in cover 25% of global greenhouse gas emissions. 50, as you can see in the slide, 50% of the reductions needed for net zero emissions will come from technology that is not yet available at scale. And then 2030, because all our demand commitments across the sectors that the FMC works in have a 2030 target to seek to establish early markets for these deeply decarbonized technologies. In practice, what we mean by demand signal and commitment from companies is that each FMC member, the CEO of these companies, have signed a demand commitment to purchase a certain percentage of the overall volumes of that product to be at what FMC has defined it as either low carbon or near zero levels by 2030. And we can dive into what that means exactly for cement and concrete a little later. Next slide, please. What we seek to do in FMC and the core area of focus is what's here on the slide and where the arrows show, it's the valley of death. So where we have phase one on the left-hand side, pilot scale demonstrations, companies that are perhaps debuting an innovative technology or an emerging solution might get a certain amount of capital to start. And if they pass phase two, then when you reach large scale commercialization, they may have offtake agreements and they may be able to sell these products and continue to grow. Where we're seeing a lot of really interesting innovative technologies not scale at the speed or at the size necessary is in phase two. So it's between an idea starting and being able to sell the idea. The FMC really seeks to send this credible demand signal at this stage for these solutions to scale, and all the advanced market commitments and the intricacies of these that Anisha was just explaining really fit into here, and it is really core to a lot of the FMC's goals. Our goal and our focus are on innovative and emerging technologies, not innovative and emerging suppliers. So these technologies could be being developed by large incumbents in the market, or new startups and emerging companies, or a mixture. Our focus is really on the tech rather than the size of the company. Next slide, please. The FMC covers currently 7 sectors and potentially 8 next year. So the First Movers Coalition was launched by President Biden at COP26 in Glasgow with 4 sectors, the 3 mobility sectors of aviation, shipping, and trucking. So seeking to surface sustainable aviation fuel, zero emission shipping fuel, and zero emission trucks, and near zero emissions steel. Shortly after that, in early 2022, the aluminium sector and the carbon removal sector was launched. And then following that, at COP27, the cement and concrete sector was launched. Chemicals is a final sector that may launch next year. We are working through this, but currently we have 3 material sectors of aluminium, steel, cement, and concrete, the 3 mobility sectors I mentioned, and then carbon dioxide removals as a cross-cutting sector that's key for decarbonisation and reaching net zero goals. Next slide, please. Here we've got a slide that just shows at a high level what the FMC wants to do and what it seeks to achieve. So at the top, we've got bankable offtake, which is so crucial for de-risking investment and encouraging these technologies to grow. Within bankable offtake, we have obviously the advanced market commitment element that Anisha described, and we will go into detail later with the cement and concrete lens. To achieve bankable offtake, we have 3 pieces of the puzzle. The one on the left, credible demand signals, is all about the demand commitments that these over 100 companies have made across these 7 sectors, to show that there are companies willing to buy these products when they're created. In order to connect demand and encourage demand to reach offtake, we have a large piece of work around surfacing viable supply. We have, for example, a database called our First Suppliers Hub, which is a repository of suppliers and technologies that are due to meet FMC thresholds by 2030, and it is an open source database that allows FMC members and wider buyers to understand where supply may exist for deeply decarbonised solutions, who's creating them, what technology readiness level they're at, in what geographies, and so on. So really seeks to help surface supply and indirectly connect it with demand. And then underpinning all this, we've got build and leverage an enabling environment. We'll hear shortly from my colleague Ineda, who leads the FMC finance pillar, which is crucial to all of this. And we also have a number of government partners that work with FMC on understanding where demand for these products may exist in their countries, where supply may exist in these countries, and connect them with the FMC and with each other. And really, the enabling environment is core to providing support for private companies, both on the demand side and the supply side. Next slide, please. So here we have a view of the current members. Obviously, I won't go into every single member on the slide. We have 101 companies that have signed commitments in either one or multiple sectors. You can see, obviously, there are different sectors with more members than others. Given the focus of this call is concrete, cement and concrete on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, is the newest sector and also the smaller sector. I think we can say it's the smaller sector, not just because it's the newest, but also because it is a particularly difficult sector to aggregate demand in due to a number of market dynamics and supply issues that we can dive into later. Within these 7 members of the cement and concrete sector, we have a range of geographies across North America, Europe, and Asia. We have a number of companies operating at different parts of the value chain and in different industries, for example, building materials, energy, and real estate. And we also have companies that work with other companies in the FMC in certain ways. So the FMC really is an initiative that has different stages of the demand side of highly decarbonized products, whether it's final use or construction or real estate. It's it seeks to try and uncover demand at different areas of the value chain. I think it's important to send a cohesive demand signal. Next slide, please. This is just a quick overview of what the FMC's impact has been to date. So as I mentioned, 101 companies that have signed these commitments. Across the FMC, we've calculated $16 billion in demand for innovative climate technologies. This has so far resulted in around 100 offtake agreements and investments. A large number of these are advanced market commitments. We've seen, for example, in the steel sector, many offtake agreements from steel producers that are yet to actually produce the steel, but instead it's a commitment to buy these when they will be produced to essentially de-risk the production costs of those suppliers. 31 million tons of CO2 is expected to be abated in 2030. As mentioned, we have 13 government partners across multiple continents. And this first suppliers hub that I mentioned on the surfacing supply side currently has 174 projects. This is continually growing across all our sectors. Although the cement and concrete sector is the smallest in terms of membership on the demand side, it has the highest number of projects in the first suppliers hub. So it's an interesting paradox there in which we have huge amounts of innovation and companies wanting to connect with buyers in the sector, and a growing number of demand players, but we're seeking to increase that. And that's maybe where some of the issues we'll discuss later will be important in connecting these suppliers that are at different levels of technology readiness level with the demand. And advanced market offtakes, of course, play a really large part here. Next slide, please. So in terms of the commitment of what the cement and concrete members have signed, this really is at the core of the FMC, the commitment letters that each of the CEOs of these companies have signed. So we have 2 commitments, one for cement and one for concrete. I will just caveat all this by saying we have recently undergone a commitment review in the cement and concrete sector to make sure that our ambition matches feasibility. And yeah, the key takeaway from this is that what I'm about to describe in terms of the thresholds have stayed the same, but we are incorporating the potential use of alternative chain of custody models to be able to meet the FMC commitment. And again, we will dive into that shortly. But what the cement and concrete commitment is for construction and engineering companies. The companies have committed to purchasing at least 10% by volume of either their cement or concrete per year at FMC near zero levels. And for real estate, developer, advisory, and architecture firms, it's committing to ensuring or specifying that at least 10% of the cement or concrete procured for the projects per year is at near zero levels. Next slide, please. What these near zero levels are is for cement, it's cement with embodied carbon below 184 kilos of CO2 per ton of cement. And for concrete, it's concrete with embodied carbon at a range of different levels according to the compressive strength of the concrete. As you can see on the right-hand side of the slide, there are a number of technology pathways that we have found that is most likely for FMC members to be able to use to meet the commitment, but I really want to underline that, that FMC is technology agnostic. So apart from carbon offsets that you can see on the screen, we would not say to a member, you must use X technology to reach the commitment. But obviously understanding the state of supply out there and understanding what technologies exist in collaboration with our knowledge partners and with wider ecosystem partners, we have narrowed what technology exists that could be used to meet the FMC commitment to the ones on the right-hand side of the screen: carbon capture, alternative cement chemistries, fuel switching, SCMs, and of course, a mixture of some of these can be combined to reach the FMC threshold. Yeah, just before I finish on this slide, wanted to reiterate that I think out there in the ecosystem, there are a number of green or low carbon or more environmentally friendly thresholds. We're aware that these figures are on some of the highest level of ambition in the sector, but that really goes to the heart of the FMC to be deeply decarbonising and to seek to scale these emerging and innovative technologies. To meet net zero 2050 goals, we understand that a range of activities are needed, including things outside of the FMC scope, such as energy efficiency, let's say, or using less concrete, replacing it with timber, other solutions like that. When it comes to the technological pathways on the screen, and others that may exist to meet the FMC threshold, we understand that advanced market commitments would be important, not just for perhaps the carbon capture solutions that may be used more by the larger incumbents in the sector, but also for these new and innovative technologies such as alternative cement chemistries, using no clinker cement, using alternative raw materials. When we look at net zero 2050, we understand that CCUS may play a bigger part in the coming years than others, but FMC seeks to encourage the growth of all of these commitments, all of these technologies. And that's where advanced market commitments for the different types of technologies become really important for the FMC to stay true to its goal, regardless of the percentage of reductions globally that these are due to produce. I'm happy to go into this in a bit more detail later. I think that's probably it for an overview of the FMC and the cement and concrete sector, and I'll hand over to my colleague Aneda to discuss the importance of the demand signal.
Thank you, Daniel. Hi, everyone. My name is Aneda Lichai. I also work at the World Economic Forum on First Movers Coalition, leading the finance pillar. And as Daniel suggested earlier, this is one of the enabling tools, pillars that powers this private demand signaling initiative. We're trying to bring in the various players in the capital stack of the project, so banks, asset managers, private equity firms, etc., to de-risk some of these investments and mobilize capital. But what makes a bankable project? If you see on this slide, we'll have we as part of this work, we published a report earlier in the year that was looking at offtake agreements, so long-term agreements of sustainable aviation fuel and green hydrogen, which are two of the clean technologies that we promote at First Movers. And we're using some of these data as sort of a benchmark against low carbon cement and concrete, given that there aren't many offtakes in the industry. But what we did for this project, we looked at these offtake agreements, and we had interviews with various suppliers, industrial buyers, financiers, and also public sector representatives, which indicated that the low carbon technologies cannot be scaled merely by the mobilization of capital towards producers, but the early success of these first of kind projects in reaching the final investment decision. So in getting, the first sort of CapEx tranche depends fundamentally on demand. And the reason for that is because investors are looking for projects with a very robust business case, which balances the distribution of risks. So this concept is referred to as the bankability, which involves sharing risk among producers, sponsors, and the buyers, or what we call the off-takers. So they're looking for offtake agreements that cover the majority, if not at all, the production capacity, especially at the beginning stages of a production facility. And there's two reasons for this. First is because low carbon cement is not yet a marketable commodity. So projects will find it challenging to raise revenue in the absence of a binding purchase agreement. And then secondly, most of the producers' revenue, as it currently stands in production facilities that are producing low carbon concrete today, comes from public incentives like the production tax credit or the IRA grants, which are difficult to hedge against. And for this reason, it's deemed very critical that there are offtake agreements in place where the producer has entered into long-term agreements with potential buyers that could de-risk the investment from an investor perspective. And another reason why this is also so important is because the more there's offtake agreements, then the more scalable the production becomes, which then over time decreases the green premium over time and across projects. Next slide, please. So as Daniel described in his slides, we are at a place of this initiative where we have aggregated significant demand. We have 101 companies. We are building a very strong supply database. We have launched the first suppliers hub, which is a repository of projects and producers that are producing this low carbon and clean technologies, for which we require about 6 times the capital needed. So there's a huge, significant investment gap that exists. And therefore, our strategic priority going in this year in the First Movers is to turn these commitments into actual agreements and actual offtakes. Next slide, please. So I won't spend too much time on this one. Anish covered a lot of these barriers that exist today. So even with a significant demand signal, there's significant challenges to overcome in the market. I want to single out here the high cost gap, or what we call the green premium, which is in the end sort of the factor for the economics of a lot of these projects not being deemed bankable enough. So in the next slide, we have done some analysis, and we've seen that if this green premium can be diluted from all the way to the end product. So for instance, if we take the cement, the green cement example, the premium on the decarbonized cement production is about 75 to 140% per ton cement compared to the, to its traditional option. That becomes about 15 to 40% on decarbonized concrete production per ton concrete. But all the way to the end consumer, it only makes up a 1% increase on a single family home. So, and then we see this across the steel and the aluminum examples here in this case. And this is, these are rough estimates, but it's interesting to see here that there's a dilution of green premium that exists across the heavy emitting sectors, and the segmentation of the value chains, where buyers more upstream are expected to cover high green premiums, and then vice versa, the suppliers confronted with the challenge of securing these offtake agreements and financing for projects is providing a major obstacle. So how do we dilute that green premium along the value chain, and how do we bring this cost of decarbonization down across the value chain is one of the challenges that we're also thinking about as FMC matures as an initiative and as we build this market. Next slide, please. So I just want to spend a couple of minutes to talk about the key components that constitute a long-term contract. This would be important for any corporate, large buyer or public agencies like yourselves when entering into an agreement with a producer. So first we have the off-taker credibility, and this is from the point of view of a financier who is looking to provide debt financing to a project. So what they're interested in an offtake agreement during their due diligence process is the off-taker credibility. Here's the how mature is the buyer? Does it have a long-standing credit history? Does it have a healthy P&L statement, technological experience? This is because when a bank looks for a large corporate buyer like Amazon or Shell, if they breach a binding agreement, that would have very insignificant effect on their P&L. So the financiers are looking for this sort of proven demand by these large corporations or large agencies. So in order to deem the project de-risked. Then there's the offtake terms and conditions. Here's where, at least still today, the majority of the offtake to date is covered by non-binding MOUs, Memoranda of Understanding, without specific agreements or with vague terms. And even though that's a signal in the right direction, it's essential for this project to reach FID or final investment decision, is to have contractually binding offtake agreements. As you know, an MOU is not deemed bankable enough. So in particular, banks are looking for offtake agreements that are interested in termination terms that ensure the project can be debt-free at a minimum, and then with some including some full equity refund or loss of profit refund if things don't materialize. Then on the offtake volume, the goal is to set as much of the revenue hedged as possible through purchase agreements. Obviously, ideally 100% coverage, but that's very difficult and financiers understand that. So what we see today is that a lot of offtake agreements aim, and this is still very ambitious, but they aim for a threshold of about 50 to 75% of contracted value across the bankable offtake. On offtake duration, this would be the time that would be needed to cover the tenure of the debt financing. A lot of the project financing for clean technology to date typically ranges from 8 to 14 years. But a lot of the offtake agreements are much shorter than that. They're about 4 to 5 years. So there's been a consistent sort of, call from financiers in these conversations to say, look, perhaps, there could be offtake agreements for 10 years or longer to provide sufficient coverage. Again, this is very ambitious. It's not the reality where these products are today, but ideally that's where the market will go. And then lastly, the offtake pricing and pricing structures. These are key considerations for large buyers and for public buyers. Ideally, the offtake agreement falls within a competitive green premium range, but again, In the case of green concrete, that is still very high compared to the traditional concrete price, and therefore we see the need not only for different pricing mechanisms, but also hedging mechanisms against that. So if we move to the next slide, this is again from this is an illustration that shows the price structures of sustainable aviation fuel offtakes. And again, there's more examples like this in the market. So it was easier to sort of build a prototype based on the SAF market. But what we see here is the range of options from the least to the most risk shared by off-takers as you move through the various pricing mechanisms. So generally speaking, financiers would favor pricing structures that would distribute the project risk between the various parties involved. And therefore, if you go by that logic, the cost plus pricing model is more favorable, because that includes not only a cost. So in this case, the cost of the product would be the production cost plus the markup to cover, various costs like admin and R&D, but it would have a limit, a maximum limit or a cap, and this would give some certainty, to the buyer that the price would not escalate beyond a certain point. And then we also see some additional various business model, like a take or pay or the ownership venue, where a lot of producers enter into a JV, a joint venture partnership with the producer in order to not only secure their supply, but also lock in a price. Now, this is very sort of true for SAF, but we have, if you move to the next slide, we have adapted this, taking into consideration certain challenges or considerations for the low carbon cement and concrete space. So, on the right hand of that column, you'll see what could be some potential implications for each pricing mechanism, applied to the cement and concrete product. And then on the last slide, understanding that offtake agreements have not taken off as quickly in the low carbon cement and concrete space. As Daniel mentioned, there's also alternative chain of custody models that are now proliferating in the market. We've seen also the development of book and claim platforms as alternative tool to strengthen the demand in parallel to offtake agreements. And in this case, a typical model will allow the producers to book the emission savings of a good that they've produced in one place, and then the customers, the indirect buyers, to claim the emission benefit from these goods for their own climate disclosures in a different place. And this decoupling of the physical product from the environmental attributes has its own benefits. And in the particular case of cement and concrete, it has some key features. So that includes balancing out demand and supply geographically, given that the regulatory guidelines and also the environmental guidelines can be different across regions. You could aggregate supply and demand through a system like this that sort of makes up for those differences. So, for example, corporate in one jurisdiction can purchase low carbon cement and concrete, or can purchase an attribute and fund the purchase of low carbon cement and concrete that is deemed usable in another jurisdiction. Furthermore, the enabling of this decoupling between customer and product makes it possible to remove logistical barriers. So, for example, instead of shipping, cement block, concrete block, from Alabama to Boston, you can have corporations from Boston purchasing this physical product without having the physical product, but still contributing to that market in a way. And that also it facilitates a certification system, again, that comes with its own risks, and this is still very nascent. So there's a lot of guardrails to be built about how these registries work, and how the carbon attributes are being accounted for. But I think it would be important to set some of these guardrails already in motion. But this is where this is all I have, and over to Daniel for the rest of it.
Thanks, Neda. If we go to the next slide, I think in the interest of time, I'll just skim through these to basically summarize what we've explained already. So these on the slide are, I guess, the core factors in what makes the green cement market difficult. So clear and consistent regulation to incentivize low emission cement production and purchases. This is reflected in a number of heavy emitting FMC sectors and obviously varies region by region. Secondly, in the top row, a lack of clear carbon accounting guidance. This varies, again, region by region, and includes how EPDs, so environmental product declarations, are formed, how to account for captured carbon, and how to account for some types of emissions, such as non-biogenic waste, such as tires to use to heat kilns. I won't repeat what Neda mentioned about book and claim, but the lack of a book and claim and a harmonized book and claim system currently to account for willingness to pay either further down the value chain from cement production or far geographically from cement and concrete production is clearly a gap at the moment. Typically, procurement trends for cement and concrete are on short-term deals due to project uncertainty. So this clearly, is a large barrier to advanced market commitments that are crucial for these deeply decarbonized technologies. On the bottom row, high prices. Again, I won't repeat the figures that Neda covered, but this is probably the number one concern we hear from members and buyers of or potential buyers of this type of cement and concrete. And then linked to that, passing along the costs down the value chain is difficult. So a complicated value chain means that there may be no certification benefit for companies in the middle of the value chain. So it's a hard sell for cement and concrete purchasers to them. There's also a focus of prescriptive standards. So this means that a certain type of cement must be in buildings and structures to be able to be signed off. A shift to performance-based standards would be very helpful for cement that might be produced using alternative chemistries or alternative raw materials that, of course, importantly, still meet the required performance thresholds as old-style Portland cement. So yeah, just to summarize on that in the bottom right, this ties all of these factors tie into the fact that there's low supply and high supply risks to scale supply. There's almost, and that's across different types of technologies that I covered earlier. It's almost like there's a chicken and egg situation at the moment where the green premium for decarbonized cement and concrete is high while supply is so small, but the supply cannot scale due to small demand due to these reasons. So that's really where advanced market commitments we feel can help move the needle. Next slide, please. Just very briefly, I won't go through all these examples, but we are seeing the market challenges, but the FMC cement and concrete sector is seeing some progress from its members using greener materials as members try and work towards FMC targets. And perhaps the key point on this slide is the one at the bottom. Vattenfall, one of our members based in Sweden, has agreed with Semvision, a low carbon cement and concrete supplier due to meet FMC thresholds by the end of the decade. They've agreed a letter of intent for this supply of near zero emission cement. So as we progress through the years, we'll hopefully see more of these type of agreements, and indeed go further into advanced market agreements and commitments with volumes and figures attached to it. Next slide, please. Just to also bring it to life, the FMC held a workshop in July in DC, bringing together US buyers, suppliers, and government with in relation to cement and concrete, steel, and trucking. Just to summarize the cement and concrete breakout rooms and breakout room findings, and I see some people in the participants are actually there in the room, is that the technology for meeting FMC goals exists, and therefore the technologies to reach net zero 2050 exist. It's the scale that's that's the difficult issue. To scale appropriately, it was highlighted over and over again that a book and claim system to bring in willingness to pay from companies far down the value chain or far geographically from cement production is absolutely crucial for this. And physical offtake is not going to really necessarily happen just like that. So we're working where the FMC is on the working group, the RMI and the Centre for Green Market Activation have set up to create a framework for such a book and claim system, and we're excited to see the progress in this area. I will conclude just on the next slide very briefly with what the public sector is perhaps uniquely positioned to do when it comes to green and low emissions cement and concrete. In terms of purchasing and wider activities. So in terms of purchasing, we've seen federal and state buy clean programs begin to move the needle. For example, in Canada and the US, using the US example, the buy clean program not only sets aside money for the purchasing of low carbon materials, but also sets aside budget for better data measurement of green materials, and that will encourage suppliers to innovate in order to meet certain targets and certain measurements that are required of them to be able to sell to state bodies. So further state and federal buy clean programs are something that can move the needle. I've then got 2 bullet points around setting an example. So 40 to 60% of cement and concrete is purchased by the state typically. So the state has a unique position in terms of volumes it can buy, and it can also set an example in terms of showing private actors that newer materials and newer solutions are appropriate to buy and able to meet certain performance standards. And if that's linked again with doing it in advanced market offtake, advanced market commitment, that's really bringing together volume, setting example of new materials being able to be used, and in an advanced market method to really hopefully shift perceptions of what is able to be bought. And then obviously, when a book and claim system is set up for cement and concrete, or I should say cement or concrete, leveraging that and really helping it in the early days would be highly important. And then just wider activities, working I think on perhaps innovating in building codes to move to performance-based standards is crucial. If a cement reaches a performance level and it's only unable to be used in certain projects due to standards not having shifted to incorporate their potential use, that's clearly a barrier to scaling these new technologies. And then working with innovation and research labs to invest in promising technologies. We've seen the DOE's Office for Clean Energy Demonstrations invest in a large number of projects across different materials. Working with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, for example, can really help suppliers have access to the brainpower and the materials and resources needed to scale and go through the valley of death that I explained goes to the heart of the FMC mission. So I'll stop there. Thanks very much for your attention, and thanks again to the RMI team for the opportunity today.
Thanks, Daniel and Aneta, for that presentation. It really shows the level of work that's happening in the private sector to unlock advanced purchasing and really get solid commitments in place across sectors to decarbonize. So with that, we're going to pivot to talk more about the public sector and really some near-term steps that the public sector can take towards this goal of advanced purchasing. The private sector has a lot more flexibility and freedom in the way that purchasing decisions can be made compared to the public sector, given that there are a number of rules and contracting norms in place for how the public sector completes construction projects. So the next section is really intended to get the public agencies that are on this call to start thinking about ways that they can start to move towards this and build capacity. So as background, we're talking about low carbon concrete for DOTs. What that means is that there's a whole spectrum of solutions and definitions for that. Right now, today, we are seeing increasing familiarity with Buy Clean policies and the use of EPDs. And what those types of strategies are really intended to do is move the floor up and get best practices adopted for getting low carbon concrete into the market. So you will see, 10 to 40% reductions in the carbon emissions for concrete mixes through these Buy Clean and EPD reporting strategies. What we're really focused on with advanced purchasing, as has been mentioned previously, is this next generation of technologies where the production doesn't exist yet, and we really need to drive investment into those. So, starting today, there's been a lot of action at public agencies to use low carbon concrete, but the story doesn't end there. We don't want to just hit a plateau. We want to push the industry forward so that, by 2035, 2040, we are actually getting towards widespread adoption of those near zero carbon technologies. So just wanted to kind of orient folks in terms of what category of low carbon solution we're really talking about here. So we won't get too much into the details on specific technologies, but to the point I was making about, what is Buy Clean intended to do versus what is advanced purchasing intended to do. On the left, you can see some of these existing technologies that are out there, traditional SCMs. There's carbon sequestering aggregates, carbon injection products out there, and those are right now helping to reduce the emissions impact of concrete. But we need to unlock this new generation of technologies listed on the right-hand side of the slide and the really large emissions reduction potentials that they could provide. So there's, as has been mentioned previously, there's a number of barriers to the adoption of these emerging technologies, especially in the private sector. Some of those just range from, confidence in the construction industry, whether the products will work. So the highlighted uncertainty in performance. There's the perception that it's expensive, and so it's difficult for those firms to secure financing to produce their projects. There's a fragmented supply chain, inconsistent market demand, and risk-averse industry. And that will be the last time that I talk about barriers, hopefully. So why does the public sector matter? We've talked about the private sector initiatives, but why are we particularly excited that the public sector has an important stake in advanced purchasing commitments? It's because in the US, 50% of concrete demand comes from public procurement. So the government has substantial influence to drive change. So that's just in terms of size of the market. It's an important player. But what makes the public sector different from the private sector? Earlier I think Aneda was talking about how there is a gap in understanding what the supply or demand for concrete would be, 10 years out for many of the construction firms, and that's because construction is a very cyclical industry. So for the concrete sector, there's a huge challenge of knowing what the long-term demand for concrete will look like for private sector buyers. That's different in the public sector. There's a consistent high volume of consumption of concrete year to year. In some sense, if you look at a public agency, they would be able to project out what the volume of cement and concrete consumed would look like in the future. So that makes them a unique player for an advanced purchasing agreement. So that ability to forecast a long-term trend. And then also the specifications and approved product lists that DOTs and public agencies hold are really influencing the private market in the concrete industry specifically. So just wanted to highlight that the public sector has this unique opportunity given that they can foresee what the volume of consumption of their concrete and cement footprint will look like, and that they're huge technical influencers in the market. But we know that there's implementation strategies for AMCs in the public sector. The hard truth is that the public sector advanced purchasing is difficult, if not impossible today. So common construction contract models in the public sector will preclude the use of pre-purchased products. So anyone who's worked in construction knows that that you can't specify the means of construction to a contractor, and so pre-purchasing of concrete products simply is not really viable. And that comes down to some concerns around liability and who's responsible for that material if it fails or if something happens. Secondly, there's a lack of performance-based specifications. Third, there's the the behavioral change needed to apply these near zero carbon mixes. And then again, there's the fragmented value chain. So what we want to highlight today is that there are some near-term steps, and we'll go through those individually. There's a few enabling actions that the public sector can take to move towards this, and then there's also some implementation design strategies that the public sector can take. So I'll walk through this slide as an overview, and then we'll touch on each of these individually. So in terms of enabling actions to address the capacity concerns for behavioral change needed to apply near zero concrete technologies, there's an important activity around building consumer confidence and educating all the different stakeholders, whether they're contractors and installers of concrete or staff within agencies who do kind of program operations for the firm. And then organizing demand, so establishing what the criteria are for an AMC in the public sector, given that there are unique considerations, that would be an important enabling action as well. And then moving towards implementation, the first would be to pilot alternative contracting approaches to use pre-purchased product. And so really addressing those barriers that include liability concerns, contracting models that may be out of date, and enabling the use of pre-purchased products in single projects rather than something that's as big as an AMC. Unlocking innovation, so doing a prize program or some sort of initiative that will activate suppliers to produce exciting innovative mixes and use them on your projects. And then finally, joining forces to actually participate in an AMC with other buyers, whether they're private sector buyers or other public sector buyers. So with that, I'll pass it to Dharma to walk through those first 3 steps.
Thank you, Anish. Like Anish mentioned, we have 3 enabling actions as kind of the first half of the roadmap that we've been developing. And the first is building consumer confidence with the objective of strengthening the current testing regime to improve comparability of results. And overall, these 3 actions and the roadmap at large is really meant to aid in a shift to a more favorable landscape for public sector advanced market commitments and empower actors across the value chain to integrate these technologies. And when we look at this enabling action, we can think about it in three different buckets. The first is demonstrating performance-based standards that increase the flexibility of qualifying materials for projects. The second is strengthening state testing regimes by maximizing mixed test sharing across state DOTs. And the third is expanding state testing regimes to not only include to expand the concrete applications currently used in testing, but also encourage state DOTs to potentially consider launching their own testing facilities, such as MnRoad for the Minnesota Department of Transportation. And agencies can also explore working with DOE's Industrial Demonstrations Program awardees to test emerging products in the cement and concrete sector. And when we think about federal momentum around these actions, we can look to the Concrete and Asphalt Innovation Act of 2023. And if passed, it would put money behind research, development, and demonstrations, and also authorize Transportation Secretary to make advanced market commitments for low emissions concrete. Also earlier this week, the DOE launched a blueprint for a clean, competitive industrial sector, and also highlighted the agency's abilities to enter advanced market commitments in that report. Next slide, please. The second enabling action we have is providing fundamental education. That is to develop a raised understanding of and a confidence in the low carbon cement and concrete technologies. And for this, there are several different avenues at an agency's disposal to facilitate this sort of transfer knowledge or knowledge transfer. The first is knowledge sharing platforms that can be provided to promote collaboration in the industry. The second is live or on-demand industry training to uptake skills for using emerging products. And the third is industry-led collaboration groups that provide a centralized forum for propagating best practices and connecting experts and industry leaders directly to contractors and agencies. And if we look at the industry's adoption of Portland limestone cement, also known as PLC, as a case study, we find that the Portland Cement Association has played a major role in the concrete industry's acceptance of this material. And although PLC has minimal modifications to mix design or workability, the nuances of the material still require training, resources, and guidance for the industry to confidently embrace. And the Portland Cement Association has done that, providing these resources and meaningful insights to value chain actors. However, it is important to note that the uptake of PLC has not been perfect, and the lessons learned from the rollout of this material should be applied to the emerging technologies that we'll be seeing in the near future in this space. Next slide, please. The last enabling action before turning it back over to Anish is identifying key criteria for an advanced purchase commitment. So this looks like establishing a detailed set of both material and business performance criteria. For the material criteria, we can think about durability, strength, workability, and environmental impact as considerations that have to be integrated, and ensuring that the material performance is demonstrated via various appropriate testing avenues. For business criteria, these details can include target price, business plans, and production growth plans. And agencies can use milestone payments as a way to ensure that various business criteria are being met by suppliers. And once an agency has developed the material and business criteria that they'd like to pursue, then they can move forward with developing a template contract for an advanced market commitment agreement. And in that, the agency can refer to other AMCs that that agency may have already made, partner with other interested agencies, or reference publicly available agreements. And for this enabling action, we can look to two case studies. The first is the Gavi COVAX AMC that was referenced at the very beginning of the presentation. This initiative established performance-based criteria with an emphasis on efficacy, safety, scalability, and affordability. The COVID vaccines underwent rigorous testing to ensure that they met the necessary standards. And the competitive process spurred by this AMC led to the rapid development and deployment of these effective vaccines globally. And then we can also look to NASA's Commercial Orbital Transportation Services program as a program that has successfully used milestone payments to accelerate the deployment of private launches into space. And the use of milestone payments in the program overall saved significant federal dollars for NASA in the long run. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Anish to go over the rest of the actions we've mapped out.
Thanks, Dharma. So an implementation design action, as mentioned previously, is demonstration of those alternative contracting models. So an objective of this is to align the supply chain structure and market actors so that it incentivizes innovation. So addressing first and foremost some of those liability concerns that limit the flexibility of contracting models in the public sector and alleviate the issues around how risk adverse the construction industry and how owners may be limited from prescribing products. In addition, there's a few different alternative contracting models that could be considered. One is a direct contractor cement supplier agreement for longer term infrastructure projects where there are already design build contracts, or it's a 5 to 8 year a large infrastructure project. There is a possibility of actually doing a contract between the contractor who's building that project and the cement or concrete supplier upstream. Another would be the public agency mandating the use of approved low carbon materials, but acknowledging and addressing some of the performance liability considerations and potentially taking on a little bit more of that risk. And that's why the steps that Dharma mentioned previously around building consumer confidence, really doing that rigorous testing is critical, because if the public sector were to mandate use of a certain product, we want to make sure that that actually performs. And so the enabling steps around actual testing and performance are critical to unlock the use of these alternative contracting models. And what we're suggesting here is doing this on a pilot scale with specific projects, since an AMC, the volume that's needed, purchasing volume that's needed would be across multiple projects. This is really a beta test of what the contracting approach looks like before getting into such a large contract. And I will skim over these diagrams just for the sake of time, and we'll be sharing these slides so you'll have access to them. They just walk through those two different supply chain contracting models that I just mentioned. So you can unpack them. Another implementation design recommendation for public agencies is to unlock innovation with the prize program. So prize programs are essentially incentive programs that encourage competition amongst suppliers to deliver a certain product. In this case, it would be an ultra low carbon concrete mix. And it provides a platform for piloting these technologies and beta testing how an advanced purchasing system could work, but on the scale of a project or maybe a program, and not on the scale of an agency or multiple agencies. So one example of this is the Global Cooling Prize, which actually asked large cooling industry manufacturers to innovate in terms of providing efficient air conditioning and low emissions refrigerants. And the awardees were then awarded the winner was then awarded a contract for a certain volume of air conditioners for a buyer. And so something similar could be considered for the public sector to start to encourage this competitive atmosphere amongst the suppliers to provide the lowest carbon concrete that meets the material standards, durability, etc., carbon footprint standards that the public sector is looking for out of this. And finally, coordinating with other buyers. So FMC has provided this great platform for private sector buyers across sectors. And similarly, RMI is organizing a sustainable concrete buying platform as well. And so we encourage the public sector folks on the call to get involved, connect with other buyers so that folks are working together and solving these problems and piloting these ideas together rather than in isolation. And I think the book and claim mechanism was mentioned previously, and exploring those certificate models that would really unlock demand is a key next step of buyers coalitions such as this. And with that, I think we can move on to just going through some Q&A. I know we only have around 15 minutes left, so I'll just look into Q&A to see if there's any key questions that folks had introduced, and then we'll spend the rest of the time just doing a quick polling exercise to get some takeaways from the audience. So I see some requests for the first few sessions, so we'll definitely share that as a follow-up. It's all available on RMI's website. I see a question about the value chain being different for public works projects compared to the private sector and potentially being easier to navigate. That certainly could be true that the public sector value chain may be more streamlined in certain aspects, but from our understanding, there's also different contracting considerations that could make it more challenging from the perspective of launching an advanced purchasing agreement. And then I see a question about the ACI 323 code. So that is a very exciting development that ACI has now a low carbon concrete code. I encourage folks to look at that. In general, that code is starting to move the ball forward towards adoption of best practices in the market. I think that the threshold currently is set at 15% less than industry benchmarks. And so that's going to help the industry build more capacity for using low carbon concrete mixes, but it's not going to help necessarily with the challenge that AMCs are trying to solve, which is launching the next generation of investments in production. And I see that question was from Judith. Great. So I think those were all our questions. I see some that were answered live by our other panelists. So yeah, thanks for your engagement, and I will pass it to Audrey to launch our polling session. So we'll be using Zoom's polling feature. So let's see how this goes. Go ahead, Audrey.
Thanks, Anish. All right, as Anish said, we're going to move into a live polling session. It's going to be pretty quick. We've only got about 6 questions for you guys, and as he mentioned, you'll be prompted to submit your responses directly through the Zoom app. So refer to your Zoom screen and you'll see some ability to input. So our first question is, what was your knowledge of advanced market commitments before attending this workshop? And I'll give a few minutes for everyone to submit their responses. Okay, looks like responses are still coming in. Slowing down, so we can now take a look at the results. Great. And our next question. So this is a short response question. What additional questions do you have about AMCs? And I'll give you a few minutes. Again, if you are just tuning back in, you can submit your response directly via Zoom. I'll give you one more minute to wrap up responses for this one. Okay, look like responses are slowing down, so we can share those results. And then the next question, which near-term action towards implementing an AMC do you see as most critical? So select one of these as your response. Okay, I'll give you another minute or so to put in your responses for this one, and then we have 3 more questions before we close out at the half-hour mark. All right, looks like responses have slowed down, so we'll move on. All right, and our next question, demonstration projects. Which of the following actions will enable faster application of emerging clean concrete technologies? So for this questions, you can select multiple responses. Right, looks like responses are slowing down for this one. And we have 2 more questions left before we close out. All right. Question 5. What is your feedback on the concept of a Concrete Technology Innovation Prize program to beta test enabling steps for an AMC? And this one is a single choice. Okay, looks like responses are slowing down, so we'll move on to the next one. Right, and our final question. Would you be interested in participating in a coalition of states pulling their buying power to implement an AMC? Okay, great. And looks like submissions have slowed down, so we can end the polling session there. Now, it looks like we do have a little bit more time. If there's anybody who would like to raise their hand digitally and come off mute and make any final questions or comments, we can open up the floor to do that and pass over the mic. Otherwise, I will pass it back to Anish to close us out.
Thanks, Audrey. Yeah, let me know if there's any raised hands. I'm not seeing any initially. All right. Well, in that case, thank you so much for your time today, and we'll be sharing the slide deck and recording. And look out for a brief publication by NRDC and RMI that covers those 6 steps that Dharma and I provide at the very end of the presentation. So there will be more detailed there, and we're happy to have conversations with folks who attended to dig into this information more and move this forward. So thank you so much again, and have a great day.